I try to avoid that, but I think it's unavoidable.
I can't do this forever. I've been doing it since I was 21. As you move into your 80s, you say, hey, that's enough.
In a recent conversation with Vanity Fair, Robert Redford left the entire room in stunned silence when he suddenly pulled back the curtain on the darker side of Hollywood's golden age. He did not hesitate to point out legendary figures whose private lives carried disturbing secrets. A celebrated icon who forced underage girls into marriage, a star who openly flaunted racist views right on live television, and even a so-called queen of the silver screen who regularly lashed out with violence against both colleagues and staff, so viciously that one victim ended up hospitalized in critical condition. The big question is, who exactly did Redford call out? And why did he wait until now, with his hair turned completely white, to finally reveal such explosive truths? One of the first names mentioned was Charlie Chaplin, a comedy genius on screen, or simply a man dangerously obsessed with girls who were far too young. To audiences, Chaplin was the little fellow with a silly smile, sparkling eyes, and a wobbling gait that brought laughter to the entire world. But when the stage lights dimmed, he revealed a much darker side, obsessive, controlling, and willing to crush anyone to satisfy his strange desires. A striking example was Mildred Harris. In 1918, Chaplin married her when she was just 16, still a high school student in Los Angeles. Once this truth came to light, the public shifted from admiration to a deep chill that tarnished his once untouchable image. Why would a teenage girl agree to such a rushed marriage? Decades later, the San Francisco Chronicle revealed the answer. A former classmate of Mildred Harris recalled that her parents had pushed her into marrying Chaplin after rumors of a pregnancy spread across Los Angeles. The child died shortly after birth, turning what was supposed to be a fairy tale into a devastating tragedy. It was said that the Harris family received a hefty payoff to stay silent. But the public wasn't so forgiving. The press blasted the scandal as a slap in the face of American morality. And yet, Chaplin didn't stop. Only a few years later, he turned his attention to another girl, Lita Grey, a child actress who had once played a tiny angel in The Kid. Chaplin first noticed her when she was only 12. By 15, their relationship had become questionable, and at 17, Lita was pushed into a secretive wedding. In her memoir, she recalled chillingly, "I was never truly a wife. I was just another supporting character in the real-life film he insisted on directing." Chaplin controlled every aspect of her existence. He drew up strange marriage contracts dictating when she had to wake up, what she was allowed to eat, and even the exact smile she should wear when guests came over. As The Hollywood Reporter later put it, her life became nothing more than a legalized form of emotional slavery. Behind closed doors, things grew even darker. Witnesses testified in court that Chaplin staged elaborate love scripts and forced his wives and mistresses to act them out repeatedly, as though they were trapped in one of his films. Actress Joan Barry, who famously sued him in 1943, shocked the public when she revealed he made her call him Mr. during intimacy, forcing her to treat him as a character rather than a man. The press didn't hold back. The New York Post branded Chaplin a perverted clown, while Time magazine splashed across its cover the love trial of the century, reporting on the infamous paternity case between Joan Barry and Chaplin. Although blood tests failed to prove he was the father, the damage was already done. The whole nation had seen the disturbing face behind the bowler hat. And his later marriages were no less scandalous. Actress Paulette Goddard, once one of Hollywood's brightest stars, told NBC that Chaplin treated marriage like one of his films, with the wife relegated to nothing more than a supporting role meant to glorify him. Then came Una O'Neill, daughter of the legendary playwright Eugene O'Neill. She was only 17 when she married Chaplin, who at that point was 54. Her father was so outraged that he disowned her, declaring her dead to the family. The Los Angeles Times described the union as a romance that made America blush. Yet Chaplin ignored the outrage and carried on. He remained with Una until his death and fathered 8 children with her. But decades later, psychologists and journalists drew a chilling conclusion. Chaplin could never accept a grown woman as an equal. What he craved was absolute submission, and teenage girls, still pliable and impressionable, were easier to bend to his will. As The Guardian once wrote, Chaplin didn't want a partner. He wanted a supporting character, a mere prop in his own play. The price of that obsession was devastating. Mildred Harris died young, consumed by loneliness and addiction. Lita Gray lived out her years bitter and broken, forced to rely on her tell-all memoirs just to survive. And Una, though she stayed by his side until the end, would forever be remembered by the public as the teenage bride of the clown. As for Chaplin himself, the fallout from the Berry trial, compounded by America's anti-communist crusade, left him a pariah. The country that once worshipped him cast him out. He retreated to Switzerland, living out his days in a cold stone mansion overlooking Lake Geneva. All that remained of him was the eternal smile preserved on film, but behind that smile lay a life that sent chills down the spine. And just as Hollywood was still reeling from that dark truth, another shockwave tore through the industry. This time it wasn't about forbidden love or underage marriages, but something far more dangerous, an ideology. The next figure to be exposed was none other than John Wayne. The cowboy legend on screen, yet off-screen, a man who openly declared that white supremacy was the only truth. John Wayne and the Mask of a Hero. White people are born to lead. Those weren't the words of a fringe politician, but of Hollywood's own cowboy legend, John Wayne, spoken in a 1971 Playboy interview. The statement landed like a bombshell in an industry that had long celebrated him as the ultimate hero of the Wild West. When the issue hit newsstands, millions of readers were stunned. Networks like NBC and CBS even opened their primetime news broadcasts with Wayne's shocking remarks. Renowned critic Roger Ebert wrote in the Chicago Sun-Times, "Wayne has ripped away his heroic mask to reveal a face filled with arrogance and hate." And it didn't end with race. Wayne also took aim at the LGBTQ+ community. At a Beverly Hills press conference, when asked about Midnight Cowboy, the 1970 Oscar winner, Wayne dismissed it coldly. "It's a sick thing, unworthy of mention in the history of cinema." His comment poured ice water over an art world eager for openness and change. The very next day, the Los Angeles Times published a blistering editorial. While critic Pauline Kael snapped on New York radio, "Wayne sees the new as a threat, and he turns that fear into open hatred." But the most explosive moment came at the 1973 Oscars. That year, Sachin Littlefeather refused Marlon Brando's award on stage as a protest against Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans. The audience fell into stunned silence. Backstage, John Wayne exploded with rage. According to producer Howard W. Koch, writing later in Variety, Wayne attempted to storm the stage and physically drag Littlefeather off. It took 6 security guards to hold him back as he growled through clenched teeth, "I'll pull her down with these hands." It was nearly a humiliating spectacle broadcast live to millions, a moment that could have thrown the Academy Awards into chaos. From then on, Wayne's carefully built image as America's hero collapsed at breakneck speed. Young filmmakers declared open boycotts. Major studios shelved projects, afraid of the backlash his presence would spark. In cities like San Francisco, Wayne was no longer welcomed as a star, but shunned as a symbol of Hollywood's darkest contradictions. Protest banners reading, "John Wayne doesn't represent us," filled the streets. The man once idolized as a national hero had become a symbol of division and resentment. But Hollywood's shadows ran far deeper than one cowboy's fall from grace. If John Wayne provoked outrage with his words, Bette Davis, the so-called queen of the silver screen, inspired something far more chilling: fear. She was crowned Hollywood royalty, a woman whose piercing gaze could ignite the screen like fire. But those same eyes behind the camera carried something else: warning signs of sudden tempests that left entire crews walking on eggshells. Ruthlessness in Hollywood, it seemed, was not the domain of men alone. During the making of Mr. Skeffington in 1944, tension suffocated the Warner Brothers lot. Anyone could become a target. Harry Milan, a backstage assistant, recalled in his memoir that after he accidentally tore one of her costumes, Davis yanked him by the hair and smashed a prop cane against his shoulder. The blow put him in the hospital for 2 weeks. The incident never made headlines. Davis paid $5,000 to buy his silence with a non-disclosure agreement. But that wasn't an isolated outburst. George Hamilton, a Warner Brothers lighting technician, later confessed to The Hollywood Reporter that Davis once hurled a glass ashtray at him because the spotlight was too harsh on her face. The injury required 4 stitches. The next day, a studio lawyer handed him an envelope of cash with a chilling note, "Consider it an occupational accident." She did not spare her fellow stars either. Actress Miriam Hopkins remembered bitterly, "Whenever I had to film tussling scenes with Davis, I always left the set with real bruises." According to Hopkins, Davis would deliberately dig her nails into her co-star's arms, then turn away as if it were just part of the craft. That appetite for cruelty earned Davis enemies everywhere, from directors like Vincent Sherman to makeup legend Percy Westmore. But the most enduring memory among Warner Brothers staff wasn't her explosive temper or her ashtrays, it was the sound. Whispers echoed through the lot. Nothing was more terrifying than the sharp click of Bette Davis's high heels approaching down the hallway. And then came the infamous feud with Joan Crawford. If Crawford embodied icy elegance and calculated control, Davis was an untamable storm. Their rivalry boiled over during the filming of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane in 1962. Whispers spread across the set that Davis, in a fit of fury, deliberately kicked Crawford in the knee, leaving her on crutches for weeks. Crawford struck back in her own cunning way. She reportedly slipped heavy weights into props, forcing Davis to strain herself with every movement. What began as on-screen tension turned into an all-out war, transforming Hollywood into a battlefield of divided loyalties and sensational headlines. But how did Davis's story end? She still held 2 Oscars, still carried the aura of a screen queen. Yet her final years painted a colder picture. Alone in a Paris apartment, her only constant companion was a pair of oversized dark glasses hiding the same eyes that once terrified entire film crews. Those she had humiliated never returned to her side. In the end, the press remembered her not as a legend of artistry but as a symbol of cruelty. And if Davis's rage made colleagues tremble, her greatest rival, Joan Crawford, planted terror in a far more intimate place, her own household. Behind the walls of her glamorous Brentwood mansion, the actress who dazzled red carpets with perfect hair, glittering gowns, and polished smiles became something else entirely. For the cameras, she was Hollywood's mother, as the Los Angeles Times once described her, often photographed with her adopted children in carefully staged family portraits. But Christina Crawford, her eldest daughter, shattered that image in her explosive 1978 memoir Mommy Dearest. Christina revealed a childhood soaked in fear. Minor missteps brought brutal punishment. For hanging a dress the wrong way, she was savagely beaten with metal hangers. Some nights, at 3 a.m., she was ripped from her bed, forced to kneel on icy tiles, scrubbing invisible stains with a toothbrush until her hands bled. The world saw a picture-perfect mother. Inside her home, Christina claimed, it was nothing less than a gilded prison. A former maid, Mary Smith, later confirmed to the Los Angeles Times, "We heard crying so often it became a normal part of the house." Crawford, she explained, harbored a pathological obsession with cleanliness. The children were ordered to scrub the swimming pool spotless over nothing more than a few fallen leaves. One night, Crawford even forced her young adopted son to dive into the cold water as an example for his sisters. Alcohol only fueled her fury. Christina remembered one terrifying episode. She ripped the curtains down, screamed that the sunlight was dirtying the room, then slapped me across the face as if I were at fault. Her cruelty wasn't confined to home. On the set of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, Crawford's ongoing war with Bette Davis kept the crew in constant dread. One backstage worker told The Hollywood Reporter that Crawford secretly hid iron weights in her costume during a scene where Davis had to drag her across the floor, leaving Davis with lasting back pain. The peak of her calculated spite came at the 1963 Academy Awards. Davis had been nominated and prepared herself for what could have been her crowning moment. But Crawford had already made a deal with and Bancroft to accept the award on her behalf. On Oscar night, when Bancroft's name was called, Crawford walked onto the stage with a serene smile, lifting the golden statue under her rival's furious gaze. The press immediately dubbed it the most infamous backstab in Oscar history. Crawford also wielded romance as a weapon. Her affair with Clark Gable became headline gossip, while rumors swirled of a shadowy relationship with Howard Hughes. Many papers hinted that Crawford treated love not as affection, but as strategy, sacrificing partners and rivals alike in her climb to Hollywood's summit. To the public, she remained the flawless icon, polished hair, dazzling gowns, the image of elegance. But to her children, she was something else entirely. Both Christina and Christopher Crawford would later condemn her in interviews. Christina said bitterly, "The world saw a queen. I saw a tyrant in an evening gown." Her final years stripped away the glamour. Alone in a small New York apartment, estranged from her children and abandoned by friends, Crawford died in 1977. She left behind a glittering cinematic legacy and a darker reputation that earned her the title of Hollywood's cruelest mother. But Crawford's terror was not the last skeleton to crawl out of Hollywood's golden closet. There was also a leading man so devastatingly handsome that women across the world swooned at the mere sight of him. Behind those dreamy eyes, however, lay secrets that shocked the industry. Errol Flynn, the swashbuckling star, adored as the embodiment of charm, yet consumed by scandal, his name forever linked with accusations involving underage girls. He was the dashing Robin Hood of 1938, the swashbuckling hero of Captain Blood, a face that fueled millions of fantasies. But the glamorous image was only a mask. Behind it, Errol Flynn stood at the center of one of Hollywood's darkest scandals, affairs with underage girls. In October 1942, Los Angeles erupted when Flynn was charged with misconduct involving two teenagers, Betty Hansen, just 17, and Peggy Satterley, only 15. The press immediately dubbed it the trial of the century. The Los Angeles Times described a courtroom jammed with reporters, hundreds pushing to glimpse Flynn as he entered with his trademark half-smile, defiant and unrepentant. The testimony shocked the nation. Peggy recounted how Flynn lured her onto a yacht off Santa Catalina, drowning her in alcohol until she was too weak to resist. Betty described a room at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel where, she said, he forced himself on her. The details were so vivid that the New York Daily News splashed the headline, "Robin Hood turns predator." What enraged the public most was not only the accusations but the outcome. Flynn's lawyer, star defense attorney Jerry Giesler, nicknamed the Fixer of Hollywood Stars, was paid a staggering fee to defend him. Rumors swirled that Warner Brothers and Flynn spent hundreds of thousands of dollars silencing witnesses and swaying jurors. In the end, Flynn was acquitted, but in the public eye, the stain never washed away. Instead of retreating, Flynn doubled down. His Mulholland Drive mansion became a palace of excess, nights filled with alcohol, drugs, and girls, some allegedly under 18, invited under the guise of screen tests. A musician recalled being forced to play piano for 12 straight hours, threatened with being tossed into the pool if he stopped. A server later admitted he saw girls barely out of high school being ushered upstairs. Flynn also indulged in bizarre thrills. Friends described his philosophy as, "Never refuse a pleasure." He bragged about experimenting with everything, from cocktails laced with narcotics to intimate games that disturbed even his closest companions. Satirical papers gave him a new nickname, the Gentleman Without Limits. But excess comes with a price. Flynn's health collapsed early. His once handsome face aged rapidly, his skin wrinkled, his teeth rotted, his body withered. When he died in 1959 in Vancouver at just 50, medical examiner Dr. Thomas Noguchi remarked in disbelief, his body resembled that of an 85-year-old, exhausted by illness. The seductive eyes, the legendary roles, the aura of charm, none could hide the truth. Errol Flynn had destroyed himself in a whirlpool of indulgence and scandal, a living cautionary tale of fame devoured by excess. But Hollywood's darkness was not only about libertines spiraling out of control. Sometimes, the smiling face of America's ideal father hid horrors waiting at home. And one of the most shocking examples was none other than Bing Crosby. To the public, Crosby was the warm voice of Christmas. His timeless rendition of White Christmas became a song that carried peace and comfort into millions of households. Yet behind closed doors, his own children would later describe a very different man, a father whose punishments involved whips and buckets of freezing water to the world. Bing Crosby was the image of the gentle father by the fireplace, his deep baritone voice carrying like a blessing into every home. He became a cultural symbol of warmth and tradition. But when the spotlight faded and the doors of his Hillsborough mansion closed, a very different man emerged. For his children, childhood was no lullaby sung by a famous father. It was a chain of merciless discipline. They remembered the leather whip that always hung in the living room, its mere sound enough to send them into terror. Crosby ruled his household like a military barracks. Meals eaten in rigid posture, shoes lined up in flawless order, every mistake punished without hesitation. Sometimes, punishment crossed into cruelty. The children had their heads shoved into basins of freezing water until their lips turned blue, then yanked out again as if it were nothing more than a lesson in building character. Outsiders saw glimpses of this horror too. A former maid told the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner she once found young Philip Crosby trembling, lips pale after one of these so-called lessons. Crosby, she recalled, walked away calmly, as if it were no different from sweeping the floor. And beyond the walls of his family home, Crosby's ruthlessness followed him into the studio. In Hollywood's recording rooms, he was notorious for perfectionism so extreme that a single mistake could send him storming out, leaving entire crews stranded and an entire day's work wasted. Robert Redford's revelations tore down the shining facade of Hollywood's golden age. Behind the genius of Chaplin, the cowboy heroism of John Wayne, the fiery gaze of Bette Davis, the elegance of Joan Crawford, the irresistible charm of Errol Flynn, and the warm voice of Bing Crosby were stories of obsession, violence, betrayal, and cruelty. These icons who once defined an era also carried secrets that still make the world shudder. And this is only the beginning. If you want to uncover more of Hollywood's hidden truths, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the next story will be even darker.